What was the worst job interview you've had? Story 1. At an interview for a tech startup, they asked me, if you could be any animal, what would you be? I answered otter because, fun, active, work well with their hands, and cute. They really debated whether or not to hire me because of that answer because, and I quote, "We only hire predators, never prey." And they weren't sure how to quantify an otter because none of them had ever paid the least bit of attention to any sort of animal documentary or read biology or, visited a zoo recently. God, that job sucked hard. To be fair, I'm not exactly sure how to categorize an otter either. Off the top of my head, and I'm not sure what the predators of an otter are except for trappers. And they certainly are dangerous for sea urchins. I'm surprised that this person took this job to begin with because I think that interview would have rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. In the comments, are otters prey or predators? Story 2. I drove an hour away to an interview at 8 a.m. I waited outside the interviewer's office until 8:30 a.m. with no one to tell me where to go or where she was. Finally, another employee walks by and I ask if they know where this woman is to interview me. They had no idea where she was, why she was late, and told me if she wasn't there yet, I should leave because she probably forgot. Okay. I decide 45 minutes is the cutoff, especially standing in a government building looking like a creep waiting. 8:45 on the dot, she rushes in, flustered, wet hair, and in casual yoga pants. With all the resurgence of patience I could muster, I greeted her and was met with a passive-aggressive scolding of how the interview was at 9, not 8. I triple-checked the email asking me to interview, and it was 8. We had conducted a phone interview, and she followed up with an email request to an in-person interview at 8. I was 100% positive on this, because I hate being late. Even with this, and I said, "I'm certain you said 8 a.m., ma'am," she wasn't having it. Conversely, she also went on about why she was late, surmounting in she went to the gym and forgot her underwear to change into, and had to stop at a store and buy new ones after working out before coming to work. She told me this in the first 5 minutes. Why? I didn't ask her. Regardless, she looks at my resume, apparently for the first time, because she proceeds to tell me how it is unimpressive and my graduate studies should have yielded more numerous publications after 1.5 years. In my field, most don't publish until after 3 to 4 years. Even still, she kept saying how I had moved up the interview time, showed me the workspaces, and told me I probably wouldn't be interested in what they do here. I politely told her I had driven, at her request, to be there and interview for employment. I was very interested. She waved me off. As we left, I just tried to hold it together. I was very poor and very desperate for a job, thanked her, and she told me how great it is to work for the government, how good the benefits, the pension, the time off are, on and on. She said, if you can find an opening working for the government, you should try to check it out and get hired on. Hold up. I just looked her in the face and said, "Yes, ma'am, that was my hope with today's interview. Thank you," and left, and sat in my car and bawled the whole drive home like the desperate loser I was. That was a low one to be sure. Story 3. This was quite a while ago, maybe about 2010, and the recession was still hitting the job market pretty badly. Here I am, graduated from college a few years before, and looking for anything. I interviewed for a job calling people trying to recruit them for 2-year college, and I think it was the National American University. I had experience with customer service and some phone work during tech support at my college, and this would be within my abilities. About halfway through the interview, I could tell it was going poorly. The guy interviewing me was asking me to give a sales pitch on recruiting, and I was failing. We got to the end, and he was upfront about saying I wouldn't be a good fit for what they needed. However, he did give me a bunch of great advice on how to properly interview and to be able to sell myself to a prospective employer. He even did a little coaching session with me. I knew he could see that I was desperate, and I was, because I was unemployed, and he took the time to help me out for my future attempts. I did take this advice and was able to get a decent job eventually. I have always used the tips he gave me, and they have helped me greatly. So to that guy, thanks. Story 4. A marketing internship the summer before my senior year of college. I remember showing the job description to my dad, and he told me that it was going to be door-to-door sales. Now, I didn't really believe him, and I showed up at 9 a.m. for the interview. Right away, I knew my dad was right about it not being a true marketing internship. There were 5 other applicants also waiting in the lobby with me, all for the same position. Behind a closed door, we could hear people shouting and laughing, and the receptionist explained that they like to have fun, and this was their Tuesday morning trivia game. While the employees were playing their game, the receptionist made small talk for over a half an hour. I'm wondering why they dragged us in at 9 if they knew no one would be able to interview us then. Finally, trivia ends and it's time for us to get paired up with a current employee to shadow for the day. Now, this was not explained beforehand and not what I would consider an interview. After all the other applicants are paired up and leave to do door-to-door sales or whatever, I'm told my person wasn't there that day. Now I'm really annoyed about 1, being lied to about the interview process, and 2, the fact that they attempted to reschedule me when they knew my person wasn't going to be there. The receptionist takes me into another room to show me a diagram of the company structure that is a pyramid and tells me that pay is commission-based. I leave and am relieved a week later when I'm told I didn't get the job. It sounds pretty embarrassing, and hopefully the dad was pretty cool about it and didn't rub it in. This is probably a common occurrence for others who have fallen into a pyramid scheme initially. There seems to be so many multi-level marketing gigs out there, and it's not surprising to hear somebody get led to believe it was a legit job interview. At least they realized what it was on day 1 and not like years in. This person should probably be thanking their dad for looking out for them and trying to protect them. Story 5. 5 interview rounds, with the last interview round being with the CEO, all for an entry-level customer service job. During the last interview, the CEO said you weren't allowed to get sick and you weren't allowed to leave at the end of the day until all of the work had been done. So, even though the job was 8 to 4, the CEO said customer service reps often stayed until 6 p.m. or later. She also asked if I would be comfortable secretly reporting to her about what the customer service team is up to. I declined the job offer, and the company harassed me with emails asking why and what they did wrong. Really glad I didn't take the job. Story 6. Many years ago, I was interviewed for an IT director position at a finance and legal consulting firm. Apparently, they were expecting an older-looking person and assumed I was there for the temp or admin positions. I was given a reading comprehension test, a typing test, and a spatial awareness IQ test. These took a bit over an hour in total. When I was done, the guy said, "Okay, thanks, we'll call you." I asked about speaking to the CIO and other tech directors for the IT director position. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. They kept me waiting for about 25 more minutes, realizing the mistake, scrambling to pull things together. After 45 minutes of waiting, I told them I was gonna leave. The headhunter called me right away, really upset that their mistake may cost her a commission on finding me and wasting my time. We had a very nice discussion about how she needed to screen and brief her clients better and how they made several bad assumptions that could be an HR issue within the HR department of the consulting firm. I never worked with her again. No idea if they ever found a new IT director. I feel like I dodged a bullet in a potentially disorganized and toxic workplace. I did learn that at the time I was typing 80+ words per minute, mistake-free. Story 7. I didn't conduct interviews, but I was the front desk person who handled scheduling the interviews and made small talk with them for a few minutes while they waited for the manager to get ready for them. Most people were polite and nervous, and I enjoyed sort of putting them at ease. But there was this one guy, maybe 18, who had obviously been forced into it by his parents. He showed up dressed nicely, but his attitude was horrendous. While waiting, instead of polite small talk, he insulted the company, the position he was applying for, and me. I was shocked and just stopped trying to talk to him, and we sat in silence for a few minutes until the manager came out and greeted him. He must have been similarly rude to her, because after he left the interview, she came out shaking her head and said he was not getting the job. 2 days later, his dad shows up in my office asking why he didn't get hired. And that was awkward. In hindsight, I think it was actually the father who called to schedule the interview, not the son, because the guy on the phone had been perfectly nice. Story 8. Had a phone interview and the woman kept asking more and more intrusive questions, kept hinting that I'm a total piece of crap who's totally unfit for the job. It was the easiest job description ever, and then jumping to conclusions about my life that were completely untrue. For example, I found out that being a freelancer who gets a lot of decently paid work each month is apparently living off my parents. She kept going on and on like that for quite a while before I told her to F off and hung up. Didn't really need that job too badly, but it was in a different country, so the travel aspect was the main reason. Years later, I found out it was a stress interview, which apparently is a thing. Yeah, screw those people. I'm not familiar with what a stress interview is. I mean, for most people, job interviews are already stressful and nerve-wracking. Is this like an interview with only the purpose of making people uncomfortable and then seeing how they would react under pressure. Not sure how effective the interview style can be if it just leads to people bowing out of the process in the first place. I think this kind of interview probably says a little bit more about the company than it does the people they are interviewing. Like, we're the kind of company that likes to torture our employees and enjoy being harsh. Story 9. At an interview to be a county street sweeper, guy asked me if I have a girlfriend, and then proceeds to rant for 5 minutes how young people don't get married anymore. Then he asked me what I want to avoid at the job. At the time, I had no idea how to answer, as I'd never been asked that in an interview before. So I ask him to clarify, to which he just repeats the question over and over until he gets super angry that I don't know how to answer that. And then he asked me to leave. To this day, the most uncomfortable interview I've had. Story 10. So I was interviewing for a job in Houston and lived in Austin, about 2.5 hours away. I drove to Houston for the first round of interviews, and they said it went well and wanted to bring me in for a final interview. So I drove there again. It seemed like it went well, and they told me that they had one more interview to conduct and they would have a decision tomorrow. So the next day came and went. I emailed the manager to ask if any decision had been made. Nothing. Waited a couple more days, left a voicemail. Nothing. Then, a couple days later, I just called the main number for the company and told the receptionist why I was calling. She was like, "Oh, well, someone just started in that job yesterday." So they ghosted me after I drove a total of 10 hours to interview twice. Still salty about that 11 years later. Story 11. Applied for a desktop support position. $15 per hour advertised. A bit on the low side, but I was out of work and needed to pay bills. Sat down for the interview with two guys. Interviewer A introduced himself as the manager/network/project manager and introduced interviewer B as the server guy. Indicated he was looking for someone to bridge that gap between the two of them when things got busy. He wanted someone who could take the overflow of work and handle project management tasks, network configs, server admin work, and handle the day-to-day desktop requests of the office. Cue my eyes getting as big as saucers. I apologized and indicated I thought I was in the wrong interview. I had applied for a desktop support position for $15 an hour, and his response was, "Oh no, you're in the right spot. It's desktop support and a few other tasks as we need to assign them to you." There was a typo in the job advert though. It's only $13 an hour. Yeah, I just stood up, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, apologized for wasting their time, and left. Talk about a couple of out-of-touch managers at this company. They were basically saying, "We want you to pick up all of our slack and mostly do our jobs for us, but we don't want to pay you more than minimum wage." I feel bad for whoever they convinced to join their team for those wages. I imagine they are going to get a high turnover rate. Story 12. Ooh, I got this. My interviewer comes about 30 minutes late, and his first comment is, "You're the best-dressed candidate we've had all day. I'm in a polo and khakis." This man is a mid-50s-ish, well-groomed man in a button-down shirt and tie. When we get to the interview room, I expect this obviously senior and ranked guy to do the interview, but when we arrive, the manager, in quotes for later, turns out to be an early 20s white guy in a t-shirt with a dyed purple mohawk. I was beyond confused, but whatever, don't judge a book by its cover. The manager then proceeds to stay sitting as I shake his hand, never motion for me to sit, not ask for a resume at all, and just start with the questions. I'm not a very formal guy, but even I was confused by all this. All the questions are normal stuff like, where do I work now, my school, if I live in the area, that stuff. Then he gets into job-specific questions and starts with, what would you do if you knew an employee was stealing? Obviously, I tell him that I'd report that employee because you aren't allowed to steal. Well, what if it was the cheapest item in the store, a 99-cent water bottle, and they only did it once? Again, I say stealing isn't allowed and those costs can add up if they keep stealing. Well, let's say it's your store, Jimani 5100S Supply Store. What do you do? I tell him if it's my store and one of my employees felt the need to steal water, I'd probably just buy it for them and tell them not to steal in the future. Well, what if you forgot your wallet? You forgot your wallet and now your employee is behind on rent and their last paycheck hasn't gone through yet and they haven't been paid. Now at this point, I'm just at a loss for words. What the heck is going on? Does he want me to say I just let someone steal or something? I genuinely feel like I'm being punked. He noticed I'm kind of stuck and just moves on. All right, how about we test your sales pitches? Imagine someone comes in and wants 4 of the chairs you're sitting in at $25 each. How would you sell them the chair I'm sitting in for $100 each. Again, I'm at a complete loss. What could I possibly say to that? If someone comes in wanting one kind of chair that's obviously a cheaper option, how the heck am I supposed to convince them to pay 400% that price for a different chair that's not obviously better in any way, especially on a product I know nothing about? I don't even remember what I said, but there's no way in hell it was coherent. After this, the guy ends the interview without ever having seen my resume, calls me by the wrong name, and sends me on my way. As for why the manager was in quotes earlier, a coworker of mine who knows a worker there told me about a week later that nobody who works in that store has a purple mohawk. All of the district managers are black, and the older guy I described is the store owner who should have done the interview. I still don't know who did my interview. Story 13. I had one for a job that was a little below my pay grade and far outside of where I wanted to work. But times were tough and I was taking all the interviews. I go in and the guy asked me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited would you be to work here? I said 9 because, what else was I supposed to say? And he said, oh really? Why so high? I had to come up with some answer that wasn't just that I need to pay rent. So I said that I was just really excited to work for a small company like this. The guy replied, huh, and didn't say anything. Later, they called me and said they would only hire me if I started the next day, and as far as I know, it was an above-board, salaried secretary-type position. I explained that I would need a few days because I was moving to an adjacent area, and he said, well, then never mind, don't bother. And even though I explained I would probably need 2 days instead of 1. Extremely weird. Story 14. The interview was at a well-known bank in the city for a software developer job. Walked into the interview room, shook hands with the 2 guys, then one of them said, nice to meet you, Jessica. My name is not Jessica, so I'm immediately confused. Apparently there was a mistake and they wanted to actually interview a Jessica and not me. They went along with the interview anyway, but they were clearly frustrated. It was one of my first real job interviews after school, so I was trying to stay positive anyway, but lost it shortly after we started. I gave them a synopsis of my background and how I got into programming by creating video games when I was a kid. Their response? We're a bank. We don't make video games here. I don't even know how to respond. Did they think I was actually that stupid? Anyway, I wasn't expecting to ever hear back, but around 3 months later, got an email for the job offer. Obviously didn't take it, but I'll always be genuinely curious if that was meant for the real Jessica. The perfect response to that job offer would have been, I don't know if I can work at your bank. I'm only a video game engineer after all. I think this person should have just taken the job, gone by Jessica during their entire time there, and just create some video games about working at a bank or something. That would really throw them off, and they would certainly not know what to do. Suppose you could also use those software skills and create the computer program from Office Space, and just slowly bleed the company dry. I wonder what kind of staplers they use at this company.